Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Fiscal Year 20 Second Chance Act Pay for Success Initiative Outcomes-Based Contracting to Lower Recidivism and Homelessness Kickoff webinar. Congratulations on your award. We're excited to have you here today and to talk to you about the training and technical assistance that will be available to each site. So on this webinar today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by some great speakers. So we have Andre Bethia, who's the Correction Systems Policy Advisor for the Bureau of Justice Assistance. We have Christine Lindquist, who's a Senior Research Sociologist for the Division of Applied Justice Research at RTI International. We also have Kelly Walsh, who's the Principal Policy Associate at Urban Institute. And I'm Sarah Wurzberg. I'm a Program Director for Behavioral Health at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. On this webinar today, we're going to give you some introductions and a recap of the Welcome webinar. We're going to talk more about the Pay for Success Initiative Outcomes-Based Contracting Grantee Cohort. So we'll call that SCA OBC. We're going to talk about how you get started in working through your grant processes. There's going to be a section on evaluation and sustainability training and technical assistance from Chris at RTI. We're going to go into next steps for the grant award, and we're going to leave time at the end for questions and answers. If you have questions and answers that come up as we're going over some of the PowerPoint slides, there's a chat box at the lower right-hand corner of the WebEx, and you can feel free to chat in questions at any time, and we'll answer all of those at the end of the slide deck. So I'm now going to turn it over to Andre, who's going to give some introductions.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon. My name is Andre Bethia, and I am the Policy Advisor for Second Chance Act Pay for Success Initiative, Outcomes-Based Contracting to Lower Recidivism and Homelessness in the Policy Office at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA. First off, congratulations on your grant award. You have succeeded in securing grant funding in a very competitive year. Your applications were screened for basic minimum requirements, were reviewed, rated, and scored by panels of external peer reviewers, and after an internal review by BJA, you were recommended to the Assistant Attorney General for funding. So, congratulations on your award. We're excited to work with you to plan and implement the Fiscal Year 2020 Second Chance Act, or SCA Outcomes-Based Contracting, or OBC for short. So we'll probably say SCA OBC. The grant program provides assistance to price, write, negotiate, fund, and manage contracts that pay for these services in a way that ensures accountability and incentivizes improved performance over time. Let's talk about expectations. Or we can just go into the Second Chance Act. Passed in 2018, the Second Chance Act Reauthorization Act builds on and strengthens the initial landmark legislation that was originally passed in 2008. The Second Chance Act has supported over $500 million in reentry investments across the country since it passed, including investments addressing substance use disorders and co-occurring mental illnesses. The Second Chance Act and Substance Use Disorder Grant Track supports state, local, and tribal governments and nonprofit organizations in their work to reduce recidivism and improve outcomes for people leaving incarceration. Now we can go back and discuss some of the expectations. Since each program was reviewed and selected based on criteria that is uniquely qualified them as the most competitive, I just want to lay out some very specific expectations that we have of you. We collectively, myself and the team that will be speaking, represented by RTI International, Urban Institute, and the lead technical assistance provider at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. So that's the collective we. We expect you to think about how outcomes-based contracting can support the program to lower recidivism, decrease homelessness, and address substance use disorders. That you will take on the planning processes and all the grants and engage with your technical assistance provider on every bit of analysis. That you will enter into outcomes-based contracting, either for reentry services using a validated risk tool or to provide permanent supportive housing or recovery housing. That you will manage outcome-based contracting, including data, reporting, and performance measurements. That you will ensure government staff and service providers have adequate training on Second Chance Act outcomes-based contracting procurement, intervention, data, and outcomes validation. And if you don't, we'll help you get there. That you will seek help when help is needed and communicate regularly with your TA coaches as well as BJA staff. You will have a state policy advisor, Dr. Stork, who is on this call, on this webinar, from our programs office, who will help you with budget and grants management, and I will help you on the policy side. Your expectation of us, you can expect that we will support and assist you as you set out to reach the goals to enhance your systems and reach program goals. We want you and your staff to have the necessary tools to serve this critically underserved population to help your communities. Both the BJA program staff, the policy staff, will be responsive to your inquiries as they arise. The CSG Justice Center is the technical assistance provider for the SCA OBC grantees with assistance from their sub-awardee, the Urban Institute. Each of you will have a TA coach, technical assistance coach assigned to you, and we expect them to call you, email you, challenge you, and support you. There are 3 Second Chance Act OBC outcomes-based contracting grantees this year that represent a state, a county, and a tribal nation. BJA, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, is the funder for the grant program. The training and technical assistance provider is the Council for State Governments Justice Center with support from Urban Institute. The National Reentry Resource Center, which will be a great source of information for all the Second Chance Act grantees, is run by the American Institutes of Research, or AIR. At BJA, or the Bureau of Justice Assistance, our mission is to provide leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support local, state, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. Specifically, BJA provides funding to support law enforcement, combat violent and drug-related crime, and combat victimization. Through the development and implementation of policy, services, and sound grants management, BJA strengthens the nation's criminal justice system and restores security in communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andre. So as I said, my name's Sarah, and the organization I work for is called the Council of State Governments. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit agency that is a membership organization of all 3 branches of government. And then within the Council of State Governments, the Justice Center is the criminal justice policy shop for the Council of State Governments Justice Center. We're really happy to be your training and technical assistance provider for this award. As we mentioned, Urban Institute is a sub-awardee for the Council of State Governments Justice Center and will support training and technical assistance to certain Second Chance Act outcomes-based contracting sites. If a site is already affiliated with Urban Institutes as part of their grant, then the CSG Justice Center will be providing training and technical assistance without the support or coordination with the Urban Institute. Urban Institute has a long history as a leader in pay for success and outcomes-based contracting, and our teams at the Council of State Governments Justice Center and the Urban Institute look forward to supporting each grantee through the planning, analyses, and implementation of outcomes-based contracts. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Kelly, from the Urban Institute to give a brief introduction to their organization.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. Just briefly, I'll mention that the Urban Institute is also a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. So Urban's broader mission is to open minds, shape decisions, and offer solutions through economic and social policy research and training and technical assistance. So since 2012, we've been creating content and providing TA to support places exploring pay for success and other outcomes-based financing models to fund solutions to intractable problems. And so for this work, the Urban team will leverage lessons learned from that work and provide TA, as Sarah mentioned, to the grantees that currently do not have an existing connection to another Urban team. And so along the way, we'll be coordinating this work with CSG to best support the sites.
So just to describe a little bit more of our model for training and technical assistance. So each site will be given a TA coach that will be your point of contact for the grant. We really focus on trying to connect people to experts within the field, both on either of our teams or also other experts we may know as part of the work in the field. The peer learning connections are a great opportunity. So within this cohort, the past cohort, or other sites we may have worked with, there's opportunities to connect with your peers who may have already been through some of the struggles that you'll go through in the planning and implementation phases. We'll also be able to provide resources and tools that will be, if you have a question on a specific topic and you want more information, we're here to help with that. So make sure to consider that when you talk to your TA coach. So the TA coach we really view as almost an air traffic controller. They're the ones who will try to answer your questions and get the information from the people on a team that have the answers. So they'll be having monthly calls with you. They'll also be working with you to support the analyses processes that are requirements through this grant, can provide resources and peer connections as we discussed, potential to have a site visit if that's needed for sites, and then the opportunity for group learning if that's appropriate for this group. So the National Reentry Resource Center, as Andre mentioned, is operated by the American Institutes for Research, or AIR. It is operated in coordination with BJA and OJJDP, which is the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. And this is going to be a great source of information for you. There's a website which we'll certainly make sure that you get a link to, and you'll be able to use that as a resource throughout the time of the grant. So now we're going to do a poll for all the attendees. So on the lower right-hand corner, you should see this poll pop up. If you can answer it, that would be great. The first question is, have you previously received a BJA award? And you can either put yes or no for that. And then the second question is, if so, have you previously received a Second Chance Act award? So you may have received an award through a different grant program, but have you actually worked on Second Chance Act before? So if you can work to fill these out, it looks like we have the answers already. That was quick. Okay, thank you all for letting us know. So it looks like about 30% are saying that yes, you have had a previous award, and all of those who are saying they've had a previous award have had Second Chance awards. So it sounds like we do have some folks who are quite experienced in the SCA world, but as we know, each of the new grants have different requirements, so we look forward to focusing on this one with outcomes-based contracting with you. Okay, so now we're going to dive in a little bit more to the specifics of the Outcomes-Based Contracting grant program. So far, this grant program has begun in fiscal year 19. There's been $13 million awarded to 6 different states, local governments, and tribal nations across the country through this work. I'm going to now turn it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Sarah. And so we're also excited to welcome these 3 sites, you all joining us here today, to the fiscal year 2020 Outcomes-Based Contracting cohort. And so Beaver County, Pennsylvania, will be focusing on OBC on reentry. Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma will be focusing on recovery housing. And the Department of Public Safety and Corrections in Louisiana will also be focusing on recovery housing. So again, congratulations, and glad you could join us today.
Next, we're going to turn it back to Andre to talk a bit more about the specifics of the grant program.
Thanks, Sarah and Kelly. The purpose of this program is to assist local, state, and tribal governments in converting reentry and permanent supportive housing, but many of you selected recovery housing, contracts into outcomes-based contracts in order to ensure accountability and improve performance with regard to recidivism reduction and increasing housing and emergency services. The overall goal is to improve the capacity and effectiveness of governments to pay for outcomes rather than inputs and outputs. The goal of these outcomes-based contracts is to improve recidivism, housing, and functional outcomes. That is, increase in the number of nights housed in recovery housing or emergency facilities and for service recipients while improving public safety and saving taxpayer dollars. Each grant category has 3 objectives. Category 1 is focused on outcomes-based contracting for reentry services. Reentry services for people leaving incarceration who are identified through a validated risk assessment tool as being moderate to high risk to reoffend in the community. The goal is to enter into an outcomes-based contract to provide individualized reentry services. Also, manage the outcomes-based contract between the government and the service provider through on- and off-site monitoring, outcomes validation, and incentive payment approvals, as well as ensure all government staff and service providers are trained to be able to handle the procurement, reentry services, data collection, and outcomes validation. There are 5 deliverables for reentry-focused grantees. The first deliverable is an analysis that demonstrates reentry service need based on evidence and data indicating the number and the needs of the people to be served. The grantee will need to make sure to describe the mechanisms to ensure the intended size and target population are identified and provided within the contract. The second is an analysis that demonstrates the outcomes selected for payment. Contracts must include recidivism outcomes that include the 4 mentioned above, which rearrest, reconviction, reincarceration, revocation, and can also include time to reoffense and reduction in severity of the offense. Next is an analysis that demonstrates the grantee's decisions about the outcome-based contract structure. For example, the phased approach over the period of contract, the inclusion of hold or harmless period, repayment strategy, maybe somehow the unit of outcome achieved, the weighted incentives, the percent change in the outcomes, the tiered payment schedule, the bonus payments, and the timing of payments. At the first year of the contract term, a report will be submitted to BJA. Lastly, there will be a closeout report including outcomes achieved and payments made. Next slide. Now, the objectives for Category 2 are similar, but with a housing focus, more specifically dealing with recovery housing. So enter into outcomes-based contract to provide recovery housing services for a specific subset of the community's population who exceedingly identified the thresholds for hospitals and homeless system service use or jail bookings. In this case, you can also talk about the managed outcomes-based permanent supportive housing if you chose that, but I believe you chose more the recovery housing. But it still includes data, it still includes collection report, regular metric, and outcome reviews between the government and the service provider, on and off-site monitoring, your outcomes validation, and incentive payment approvals. You want to ensure that the government staff as well as the service providers have adequate training on the Second Chance Act's OBC procurement process, permanent supportive housing or intervention, in this case recovery housing, data collection, and outcomes validation. It is mandatory that any contracts entered into using the Category 2 funds must walk with the intervention. So if you identify recovery housing, then you must use the model to fidelity. In this case, tenants have a lease in their name, and therefore they have full rights of tenancy under landlord-tenant law, if that applies to your particular jurisdiction. That leases do not have any provisions that would be found in leases, not in leases held by anyone who does not have any kind of disability. Participation in services is voluntary, and tenants cannot be evicted for rejecting services, right? So, and before we move into all of the different areas of peer support that goes into recovery housing, we want to make sure that the clients are asked about their housing preferences and are offered the same range of choices of services that are available to others. Also, that the housing that you put forth in your applications is affordable, right? So we're looking at the budget, that tenants are paying no more than 30% of their income for any of their services, or if they receive supplemental services from any of the, respective governments that are involved in this particular grant program, towards rent and utilities. That tenants will have choices in the support services that they receive, that they are asked about their choices in the case of peer support and recovery housing, and can choose from a variety of sources that are based on their needs and their preferences. Now, this may have sounded exhaustive, but this is not an exhaustive list. And I want to highlight some of the key elements for you to think about regarding the Category 2 and your TA and your technical assistance coach. So, as with Category 1, there are 5 deliverables for housing-focused grantees. In this case, the analysis that demonstrates recovery housing for many, but could be the same if you had chosen permanent supportive housing. Looking at jail, so booking and release dates, charging information, and whether there's a unit or bed. Looking at the homeless management information system, so using your VIs for that if that's used in your particular jurisdiction, which is more likely that it is. The dates in the shelter, any services used, and the location of the last service. That we're keeping track of the healthcare system, utilization, the dates, the location, the cost, and any other services that are definitely primary to healthcare. So that's talking about mental health, substance use disorder services, child welfare services, and benefit taxes. This data will support the number and the needs of the people to be served and ensure that the intended target population is identified and provided with contracted services. There will be additional analysis that demonstrates the outcomes selected for payment. So the contracts must include appropriate functional outcomes, relevant system savings, and recidivism outcomes, including jail bookings, length of stay, and charging information. The third analysis will demonstrate the grantee's decision about the outcomes-based contract structure, or your phased approach over the period of the contract. Again, that's inclusion of hold in the harmless period. Repayment strategy, right? So we want to look at that. So your percentage change in outcomes and your tier payments. and any bonuses, as well as the timing of payments. And then you also, in Category 2, will have a first year of contract term report that will be submitted to BJA, and naturally, at the end of the grant period, a closeout report, which will detail outcomes achieved and payments made. Okay, with all that said, this grant is an exciting opportunity to incentivize positive reentry outcomes. The focus of the programs on reentry, recovery housing, will allow each of the grantees to show their success through using data. So we want to be data informed, to clearly identify the target population, to make the case for the outcomes-based contract, and structure the contract to best support the success of people reentering the community. That means, in many cases, altering what you already submitted. Yes, let me say it again. That means, in many cases, altering what was already submitted in your proposal. So, to that end, we look forward to seeing how each grantee analysis to support their contract, along with the ongoing monitoring and tracking the outcomes achieved and the payments be made. All right? That's a lot, but we hope to be working with you on each step of the process. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Andre. So now we're going to move into how do you get started on this grant process. So there is a planning process associated with this grant, as there is with many of the Second Chance Act grants. It's a 12-month planning process, and there's up to $200,000 of grant funds available as you're working on this planning process. Your TA coach will work directly with you to make sure that you have support in getting the deliverables done. And you'll be working with your team members and your partners to be able to do these steps. So Andre went through this in some detail as well, but in the planning phase, there are 3 different analyses that need to be conducted before you can move to implementation. The first analysis is on service need. So this really involves looking at the data to be data informed, as Andre said, in terms of recidivism, if you are one of the reentry focused grantees, or if you're focused on housing or recovery housing, you would want to look at the housing need within the system. So is there jail booking data? Is there information from the homeless management information system? Is there healthcare service utilization data or other services that could be helpful in making sure that you're clear on the target population that will be served with this piece? The second analysis is really to try to demonstrate the outcome selected for payment. So for a reentry grantee, that could be based on recidivism, so rearrest, reconviction, reincarceration, revocation. For the housing grantees, it could be looking at where are there options for additional savings? Could it be going back and looking at length of stay in the jail? Could it be charging information, jail bookings? There's certainly a lot of information or options of what data could be useful. So those are the first 2 analyses that would be part of the planning phase. The third analysis is really based on the structure of the actual contract. So it's really thinking about what over the period or the contract would be helpful for you to think about through a repayment strategy. What are incentives? What are the outcomes or the tiered schedule or bonus payments that might be applicable to the services? And this is really looking at a similar thing regardless which category you are. And then once you complete these 3 analyses, and work with your TA coach on it, they'll then be submitted to BJA, and so it'll be submitted to Andre from the BJA policy office and Zafra Stork, who's your point of contact from the BJA programs office. And once these 3 analyses are submitted for approval with BJA and it's approved, the implementation funds would be released. Then as you move into the implementation phase, There's a couple of other deliverables, as Andre discussed as well. But once there's been a year of that contract, there's going to be a report on that contract to submit to BJA to show how it's going, what has been happening, what some of the payment options have been thus far within the contract. And then at the closeout period, there will be a more formal closeout report that will also ideally have additional data and be data informed in terms of what payments were made and what the outcomes were for this larger outcomes-based contracting effort. So I'm now going to turn it over to Chris from RTI to talk about evaluation and sustainability TTA available.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just trying to turn my video on. So good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations on your grant. I've been asked to take just a quick minute to make you aware of another Second Chance Act TTA effort that could hopefully benefit your program. And I want to make sure you know that this TTA effort that I'm going to be talking about is separate from the coaching that you're going to be getting from your CSG coach. So this effort is the Evaluation and Sustainability TTA project. This is a 4-year project that has been underway for about a year and a half now. It's led by RTI with the Center for Court Innovation as a partner. Through this project, we're currently working with 22 fiscal year 18 and 19 grantees. We're providing intensive individual training and technical assistance that focuses specifically on conducting more rigorous evaluations and effectively planning for sustainability. So I wanted to let you know that some fiscal year 20 grantees may be offered this opportunity as well, which would mean intensive TTA by an RTI or CCI coach from our team, again with a focus on evaluation and sustainability. So this is supplemental TTA. All grantees who receive our evaluation and sustainability TTA continue to have their primary TA contact provide programmatic support. And I also wanted to let you know that we have developed several resources that are available to all Second Chance Act grantees, and the resources focus on various evaluation and sustainability topics. I wanted to let you know about 2 resources that are especially salient for brand new grantees, and these are resources that can be found on the NRRC website. So on that website, there is currently a feature carousel which lets you scroll through and look at new posts, and that's where you can find these recent products that we have developed. The first one is a resource brief and accompanying infographic that identify the key evaluation milestones for grantees to hit at each stage in the Second Chance Act grant lifecycle. So this is intended to help grantees stay on track with their research and evaluation activities. And the second one is a resource brief and accompanying planning guide that provide tips for building a program's evaluation readiness and increasing its capacity for evaluation. So both of these are really helpful for new grantees. And we encourage you to download the resources on the NRRC website and check for the many other resources that we're going to be producing and posting to help grantees with specific topics related to evaluation and sustainability planning. So with that, I will turn this back over to Sarah.
Thanks so much for highlighting those resources and the opportunities. So I'm going to talk a bit through the next steps in the processes. So the to-do list is to contact the BJA programs office about budget clearance to make sure your budget has been cleared and approved. We'll work with you to set up monthly calls with your TA coach, so we'll reach out to you next week to be able to schedule those monthly calls. Make sure you review the proposal materials. We know it's been a while sometimes since these have been submitted. Just being familiar with what you originally wrote in the grant can be helpful in those first calls, so we understand that there have already been some changes due to things happening in your communities. And then we're going to start working with you on completing the action plan, or the 3 analyses that are part of the planning phase of this grant. So we're going to move to questions and answers, and I just want to remind everyone that the lower right-hand corner there is a chat box, so please write in any questions you have there, and we're happy to answer them. So we've gotten a couple of questions already. The first question is, should we be expecting required grant training and travel this year? So I think that would be a great question for someone from the Bureau of Justice Assistance to answer. So Andre or Zafra, would either of you be available to answer that?
Yes,
go ahead, Andre. I would
say
as far as I know, there's not any required travel for training travel this year. If that changes, we would work with the grantees to make sure that they could travel. But as far as I know, that wouldn't be the case this year.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, as part of work with another grant on, it sounds like another Second Chance Act grant, Innovation and Reentry Initiative, we have begun to talk about a housing resource from the Corporation for Support of Housing by way of AIR. Would there be any issues with possibly including the work under this grant in that conversation? But there are two different TTA providers. So, I mean, I think we would need more information on the specifics of what that request is. Andre, I don't know if you have additional thoughts.
No, I don't have any additional thoughts. That sounds like a question for when you start to engage that grantee on their particular contract.
Yeah, that sounds like it. I think we'll just need to talk about that on the first TA call. We'll be happy to learn more, and then we'll be able to have more information. I know in the chat box it's hard to get into some of these more nuanced pieces, but we appreciate the question. The next question is, when can we expect the planning funds to be released? So I think that might be maybe a budget clearance related question. So Zafra, would you be the one that would be good to answer that?
Sure. One thing would be to make sure that your final budget has received clearance, and you can check with me if you don't know whether or not that's been done. And then there are special conditions on your budget that you would also have to work with me to make sure they're clear. And then you would have to work with your TTA provider to complete your planning so that you could then move forward past that. But reach out to me if you have questions about whether or not your budget's been cleared, and I can show you where you can find that in Just Grant. And I can help you release your special conditions as well.
Thanks so much, Zafra. So the next question is, will there be a traditional planning and implementation guide or P&I guide? And if so, when should we expect to receive it? So the answer to that is no, there will not be, because the three analyses are really what is written into this grant. There will not be a traditional planning and implementation guide. It's getting through those, the target population analyses, the analyses related to the outcomes, and then the further analyses related to the actual justification of the outcomes-based contracting mechanism. That's really going to be what makes up the planning process. So there isn't going to be a specific guide. It will be related to submitting those analyses to BJA in coordination with your TA coach. Okay, the next question is, when should we expect initial contact with our TA? So as I mentioned, we are planning to reach out to you next week to start scheduling the TA calls. So those calls will take place in March, which actually next week is March 2. So it all tracks. So we'll work with you to find a good date and time for the call in March. And ideally, we usually try to find a recurrent date and time that'll work for the schedule. So, you know, second Tuesday at 1 p.m. or something along those lines, so we can all expect and plan for it on a monthly basis. So you can certainly expect to hear from us by the end of the next week. So if anyone has additional questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat box on the lower right-hand corner. We'll just give it a minute to see if there are any additional questions. Okay, so not seeing any questions yet, so I want to make sure to go over this with you. Feel free to continue to add questions if you have anything to the chat box. But the points of contact are the folks who are on this call. So you have Andre's contact information, Zafra's contact information. If you have questions about the performance measurement tool, you can contact the PMT help desk. If you have questions on TTA, you can feel free to contact myself. Or Kelly, as I mentioned, that I will be in touch with each of the sites in the next week to work to schedule your first TA calls as well. So you should be hearing from us soon. We'll reach out through the point of contact that was provided through BJA. So not seeing any more questions, we want to congratulate you again on your new awards. We're very excited to be working with you. I want to thank my colleagues, Andre, Zafra, Kelly, and Chris for speaking on the webinar. We appreciate your support, and we hope everyone has a good afternoon. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.